Welcome back to the Sleepy Mind channel. Tonight we explore trees and how they grow, following the movement of water, energy, and living tissue as they unfold and shape the system in steady, observable ways. If you find these long, calm science documentaries useful, you can like the video and subscribe for more. If you choose to leave a comment about where you are listening from, it is always interesting to see how far these stories travel. Let us begin. Trees are among the most widespread living structures on land, forming continuous systems that stretch across continents and climates. From a distance, they appear still, yet every part of a tree is in motion at a pace measured in hours, seasons, and years. Water moves upward from the soil through narrow vessels. Sugars move downward from leaves into wood and roots. Cells divide slowly, adding thickness and height in increments too small to notice in a single day. What allows trees to grow tall is not speed, but organization. Their tissues are strengthened by lignin, a substance that stiffens cell walls and allows trunks to resist gravity while remaining flexible. This structure supports height while keeping internal pathways open, so water can rise tens of meters from the ground to the highest leaves. The same physical principles apply whether the tree is young or centuries old. Below the surface, roots extend outward far beyond the visible trunk. Fine root tips explore small spaces between soil particles, absorbing water and dissolved minerals. Around these roots, fungi form close associations, extending the reach of the tree even further. Through these fungal threads, nutrients move efficiently, and sugars produced in leaves are shared below ground. This exchange links individual trees into larger systems, where resources and signals can travel between organisms. Chemical signals also pass through these underground connections. When conditions change around one tree, subtle shifts in growth and chemistry can appear in neighboring trees. This is not awareness or intention, but the result of substances moving through shared pathways. The forest floor becomes an active zone of interaction, shaped by concentration, flow, and response. Above ground, trunks record time through gradual accumulation. Each year, a new layer of wood forms, thickening the tree and preserving a physical record of past conditions. Narrow growth rings reflect slower growth. Wider rings reflect years when water and temperature supported expansion. By reading these patterns, scientists reconstruct climate histories spanning thousands of years. Some trees persist far longer than the societies that surround them. Individual bristlecone pines have remained alive for nearly 5,000 years. In northern Europe, clonal spruce systems have regenerated new trunks from the same root structure for close to 10,000 years. These trees began growing shortly after glaciers retreated and continue interacting with the present environment. Through their size and longevity, trees influence the movement of carbon, water, and energy across the planet. Forests store large quantities of carbon in wood and soil. Leaves release water vapor into the air, shaping local humidity and temperature. Roots stabilize soil and slow erosion. These effects accumulate quietly, shaping conditions for countless other organisms. As trees grow, they remain rooted in place while conditions change around them. Their responses unfold gradually. Growth rates adjust, leaf chemistry shifts, root systems redistribute. Through this steady process, trees remain continuous participants in the living system of Earth, linking soil, atmosphere, and time through their slow and persistent growth. A tree is a plant that has committed to staying in one place for a very long time. Unlike smaller plants that complete their lives quickly, trees invest early in structure. They build a permanent framework of wood that allows them to keep adding new growth year after year. This framework does not replace old tissue. It layers on top of it, like adding new pages to a book without removing the earlier ones. What sets trees apart from other plants is not a single feature, but a combination of height, thickness, and persistence. Many plants can photosynthesize and move water. Trees do the same, but at a scale that requires reinforcement. Their cells are strengthened with lignin, which acts like internal scaffolding. Without it, water-filled tubes would collapse under their own weight as the tree grows taller. With it, those tubes remain open, even when lifting water the height of a 10-story building. The body of a tree is organized into a few main parts that work together continuously. Roots anchor the tree and absorb water and minerals. The trunk supports the canopy and contains transport tissues. Branches spread leaves outward into light. Leaves capture energy from sunlight and convert it into sugars. None of these parts works alone. Each depends on the others to keep materials moving. Inside the trunk, water moves upward through xylem vessels that are narrower than a strand of hair. These vessels work through a combination of pressure differences and evaporation from leaves. As water leaves the leaf surface, it pulls more water upward behind it, much like liquid rising through a paper towel. This process can lift water more than 100 meters in the tallest trees without the use of any pump. At the same time, sugars produced in the leaves move downward through phloem tissue. This flow is slower and more controlled, supplying energy to growing roots, thickening wood, and developing buds. The tree constantly balances these movements, adjusting flow based on season and need. Growth happens quietly at the edges. New wood is added just beneath the bark. New roots extend at their tips. New leaves unfold from buds that formed months earlier. The tree does not grow all at once. It grows in small increments, distributed across its body, coordinated by chemical signals and environmental cues. Trees grow upright not because they aim upward, but because gravity and light create opposing pressures that shape their form over time. Cells in the growing tips of shoots respond to gravity by redistributing growth hormones. These hormones cause cells on one side of the stem to elongate more than the other, slowly correcting the angle. The result is a trunk that rises vertically even after wind, uneven soil, or shifting weight nudges it off balance. This adjustment happens continuously. If a young tree leans slightly after a storm, the next season of growth compensates. Wood laid down on one side of the trunk becomes denser, adding strength where it is needed most. In this way, trees behave less like rigid poles and more like structures that are constantly fine-tuned, similar to how muscles subtly adjust posture without conscious effort. Time is the defining element of a tree's life. Many trees grow only a few millimeters in diameter each year. Height increases in short seasonal bursts rather than steadily. This slow pace allows trees to outlast short-term changes. A dry year or a cool summer leaves a trace, but does not end the system. The tree integrates conditions across decades, smoothing variation into long-term form. A tree does not exist in isolation. Air temperature, soil moisture, microbial activity, and neighboring plants all influence growth. When sunlight is abundant, leaves produce more sugars. When water is limited, stomata on leaf surfaces partially close, reducing water loss, but also slowing photosynthesis. These adjustments resemble a household managing resources during lean and plentiful periods, expanding activity when conditions allow and conserving when they do not. The surrounding environment becomes part of the tree's structure. Roots grow around stones, into compacted layers, and along moisture gradients. Branches extend into open space while avoiding shaded areas created by other trees. Over time, the tree's shape reflects not only its genetics, but the specific conditions of its location, recording space as clearly as rings record time. Even stillness is active. At night, water movement slows, but does not stop. Sugars continue to redistribute. Cells repair damage and prepare for the next period of growth. The appearance of rest is simply a shift in process, not an absence of activity. Every tree begins as a seed, carrying within it a complete set of instructions, compressed into a structure often smaller than a fingernail. Inside the seed are embryonic tissues, stored energy, and protective layers that regulate when growth can begin. Some seeds remain viable for only a short time. Others can wait years for suitable conditions. This delay is not passive. Chemical inhibitors within the seed prevent premature growth until temperature, moisture, and oxygen levels align. Tree seeds vary widely in form, yet their function is consistent. An acorn contains enough stored starch to support early growth even in shaded forest floors. A pine seed is lighter, designed to travel farther on the wind, relying more quickly on sunlight after germination. These differences reflect trade-offs. Heavier seeds invest in endurance. Lighter seeds invest in distance. Both strategies succeed depending on environment. Movement is essential at this stage. Because trees remain rooted for life, the only chance to change location comes before growth begins. Wind carries winged seeds across open land. Water moves others along streams and floodplains. Animals transport seeds unintentionally by dropping them, burying them, or passing them through digestive systems. A jay caching acorns may forget a portion of them, effectively planting the next generation. Once a seed settles into soil, growth begins quietly. Water enters the seed through its outer coat, activating enzymes that convert stored starches into sugars. These sugars fuel cell division as the embryonic root, called the radicle, pushes downward. Gravity guides this movement. Even before leaves appear, the seedling establishes direction, anchoring itself and accessing moisture. The first root grows before any part rises above ground. This priority reflects physics. Without access to water, growth above ground would fail quickly. The initial root branches rapidly, increasing surface area. Fine hairs extend from its surface, pressing into microscopic spaces between soil particles. At this scale, soil behaves less like dirt and more like a sponge, holding thin films of water around each grain. As the root system expands, the first shoot emerges. This upward growth relies on energy stored in the seed until leaves unfold. Once exposed to light, these first leaves begin photosynthesis, producing sugars that supplement remaining reserves. The transition from stored energy to self-sustained production marks a critical shift. From this point, growth depends on continuous exchange with the environment. Early growth is cautious rather than fast. Cell walls remain thin. Stems stay flexible. This reduces the cost of construction while allowing adjustment to light and space. If shaded, The young tree may extend upward more quickly. If exposed, it may invest more in roots. These choices are not conscious, but arise from hormone gradients responding to light intensity and soil conditions. Soil itself shapes development. Texture determines how easily roots penetrate. Moisture influences branching patterns. Microorganisms begin interacting with roots almost immediately. Bacteria and fungi colonize the rhizosphere, the narrow zone of soil influenced by root activity. In this region, chemical signals flow in both directions, modifying growth rates and nutrient availability. As days pass into weeks, the seedling becomes less dependent on its original reserves. Leaves enlarge, roots thicken. The simple structure begins its slow transition into something more permanent. From this point forward, growth no longer relies on stored inheritance alone, but on continuous participation in the surrounding system. As the young tree settles into the soil, its root system becomes the main point of contact with the surrounding world. Roots do not grow evenly in all directions. They respond to moisture, temperature, and resistance. Where soil is loose and damp, roots branch more freely. Where it is compacted or dry, growth slows or redirects. This selective expansion allows the tree to invest energy where returns are highest, much like water flowing along paths of least resistance. Roots absorb water through osmosis, a process driven by differences in concentration. Inside root cells, dissolved salts create a slightly lower water potential than the surrounding soil. Water moves inward naturally, without force, filling cells and generating internal pressure. This pressure, called turgor, helps keep tissues firm and supports upward movement through the trunk. In this way, water entering at the roots contributes directly to the stability of the entire tree. Minerals dissolved in soil water move along with this flow. Nitrogen supports the production of proteins and enzymes. Phosphorus plays a role in energy transfer within cells. Potassium helps regulate water balance. These elements are required in small quantities, yet their absence slows growth noticeably. Trees adjust root growth patterns to improve access, extending fine roots into nutrient-rich zones while allowing others to shrink back. The relationship between roots and fungi deepens as the tree grows. Fungal threads extend far beyond the root surface, exploring volumes of soil that roots alone could not reach efficiently. In return, sugars produced in the leaves move downward and outward, feeding these fungal partners. The exchange is continuous. When photosynthesis increases, more sugar becomes available. When nutrients are abundant, root growth responds. These underground connections create a shared environment. A tree growing in partial shade may receive chemical cues from neighboring trees, experiencing different light conditions. Changes in one part of the system can influence growth elsewhere, not through awareness, but through physical movement of substances. The forest floor becomes a dynamic network shaped by flow rather than boundaries. Above ground, the young trunk begins to thicken. Cells just beneath the bark divide slowly, adding layers that will eventually become wood. At this stage, the trunk remains flexible, able to bend in wind without breaking. This flexibility is intentional in a physical sense. Thin cell walls and high water content allow movement while tissues strengthen gradually. As the trunk lengthens, water transport becomes more demanding. The distance between roots and leaves increases, yet the tree does not install pumps or valves. Instead, it relies on evaporation at the leaf surface. When water exits through tiny openings called stomata, it pulls the column of water behind it upward. This pull is transmitted through continuous water columns inside xylem vessels, functioning like a long, narrow straw. The diameter of these vessels matters. Narrow vessels reduce the risk of air bubbles breaking the flow, but also limit volume. Wider vessels carry more water, but are more vulnerable to disruption. Different tree species balance this trade-off differently. Some prioritize safety, others prioritize speed. These choices influence how trees respond to drought or cold, shaping growth patterns over time. Leaves develop in positions that optimize exposure to light while avoiding self-shading. Their arrangement follows geometric patterns that minimize overlap. This allows sunlight to reach as many photosynthetic surfaces as possible. Once light is absorbed, energy is transferred through a series of chemical reactions that convert carbon dioxide and water into sugars. Oxygen is released as a byproduct, diffusing into the surrounding air. The sugars produced in leaves do not remain there. They move through phloem tissue toward areas of use or storage. Growing roots draw heavily on this supply. Thickening wood requires a steady flow. Even dormant buds receive small amounts, maintaining readiness for future growth. The tree functions like a distributed system, allocating energy based on demand rather than location. Seasonal changes influence this balance. During periods of active growth, sugars are used quickly. During slower periods, they accumulate as starch in roots and inner wood. These reserves support the tree when photosynthesis slows, such as during winter or extended cloud cover. The ability to store energy over long periods is a key reason trees can persist through variable conditions. Growth is not continuous. It follows rhythms set by temperature and daylight. In temperate regions, most height growth occurs during spring and early summer. As days shorten, growth slows. Cells harden. Tissues prepare for lower temperatures. This transition is gradual, guided by shifts in hormone levels rather than abrupt change. Throughout this process, the tree remains responsive rather than reactive. Adjustments unfold over weeks and months, smoothing extremes into manageable variation. The structure that results is not designed in advance. It emerges from repeated interactions between physical laws, chemical gradients, and time. Soil is not an inert surface beneath a tree. It is a layered mixture of mineral particles, organic matter, air, water, and living organisms. Each of these components affects how a tree grows. Sand drains quickly and holds little water. Clay holds water tightly, but limits airflow. Loam balances both. A tree growing in loam experiences fewer extremes, while one in sand or clay must adjust its growth patterns to compensate. Nutrients within soil are not evenly distributed. Nitrogen often becomes available through microbial activity that converts organic matter into usable forms. This process depends on temperature, moisture, and oxygen. When conditions slow microbial metabolism, nutrient availability drops, even if the soil contains large reserves. Trees respond by adjusting root growth, extending fine roots into areas where microbial activity is higher. Phosphorus behaves differently. It binds tightly to soil particles and moves slowly. Roots and fungi release organic acids that loosen these bonds, freeing phosphorus for uptake. This chemical exchange occurs at very small scales, measured in micrometers, yet it has large effects on growth rates and leaf development. Without sufficient phosphorus, energy transfer inside cells becomes less efficient, slowing nearly every process. Potassium influences water balance. It helps regulate the opening and closing of stomata in leaves. When potassium is abundant, stomata respond smoothly to changing conditions. When it is scarce, water loss becomes harder to control. This connection means that nutrient availability below ground directly affects water movement above ground, linking soil chemistry to leaf behavior. As roots grow, older sections gradually become less active. New absorption occurs near the tips, where cell walls remain thin and permeable. This constant renewal means the effective root system shifts through the soil over time. Areas that once supplied nutrients may later become inactive, while new zones take their place. Growth therefore traces a slow, expanding pattern underground. Fungal partners play a stabilizing role in this process. Their threads persist where roots move on, maintaining access to nutrients and water. Because fungal networks can connect multiple trees, they help smooth differences in supply. A tree experiencing strong sunlight may export more sugars below ground, indirectly supporting neighbors in shade through shared fungal pathways. Above ground, the trunk continues to develop internal organization. The outermost living layer produces new transport tissue each growing season. Older layers gradually lose their ability to move water and instead become structural support. This transition does not weaken the tree, it strengthens it. Dead wood within the trunk forms a rigid core, while living tissue remains protected near the surface. Water transport becomes increasingly efficient as the trunk thickens. Additional xylem vessels increase total flow capacity, allowing the tree to support a larger canopy. At the same time, redundancy increases. If one pathway becomes blocked, others continue functioning. This distributed design resembles a network rather than a single channel, reducing the impact of local failure. Leaves adjust their structure as the tree grows taller. Upper leaves often become smaller and thicker, reducing water loss and withstanding stronger sunlight. Lower leaves may remain larger, optimized for diffuse light. These differences emerge from local conditions rather than central control. Each leaf develops in response to the environment it encounters. Energy movement within the tree follows demand. Growing tips act as sinks, drawing sugars toward them. Storage tissues act as buffers, absorbing excess when supply exceeds immediate need. During early development, growth sinks dominate. As the tree matures, storage capacity increases, adding resilience. Time introduces patterns that short observation misses. Over several seasons, growth accelerates and slows in response to rainfall, temperature, and day length. Over decades, the tree's shape reflects prevailing winds, competition, and soil depth. None of this requires foresight. It arises from repeated responses to immediate conditions. By the time a young tree has established stable roots, thickened its trunk, and expanded its canopy, it has moved beyond vulnerability. Growth no longer depends on reserves alone. It depends on continuous exchange with soil, air, and light. The system becomes self-sustaining, capable of adjustment rather than replacement. At this stage, the tree's pace settles into a rhythm. Each year adds a small increment of height and width. Each season redistributes resources. Change continues, but it does so gradually, layered over what already exists, creating a structure shaped as much by time as by material. As a tree increases in height, the trunk takes on a more central role than simple support. It becomes a transport corridor, a storage site, and a record of past conditions all at once. Inside the trunk, living tissue occupies only a thin outer band. This layer is responsible for producing new cells that will either move water or distribute sugars. Everything deeper than that gradually shifts into a structural role, remaining in place for the lifetime of the tree. The movement of water through the trunk follows physical laws rather than biological effort. Water molecules stick to each other through cohesion and cling to vessel walls through adhesion. Together, these forces keep long columns of water intact as they rise. When evaporation occurs at the leaf surface, it creates tension, pulling the entire column upward. This tension can reach pressures comparable to those inside industrial pipes, yet it is generated passively by sunlight and air movement. The height limit of trees is set by this system. As trees grow taller, the force required to lift water increases. At extreme heights, the tension becomes difficult to maintain without air entering the vessels. This is why the tallest trees on Earth, such as coast redwoods, reach heights just over 100 meters and rarely exceed it. The physics of water sets a boundary that biology adapts to, but cannot override. Within the trunk, sugars travel in the opposite direction. Phloem tissue moves energy-rich compounds from leaves toward areas of use or storage. This movement depends on pressure differences created by loading sugars into cells near leaves and unloading them elsewhere. The process resembles traffic moving from a busy city center toward quieter suburbs, driven by gradients rather than force. As the trunk thickens, these transport systems multiply. Each new layer adds redundancy. If one pathway becomes blocked due to injury or environmental stress, others continue functioning. This distributed design contributes to resilience. The tree does not rely on a single critical channel. Instead, it spreads risk across many parallel routes. The outer surface of the trunk also plays an important role. Bark regulates temperature, reduces water loss, and provides physical protection. Its texture and thickness vary by species and environment. Trees in fire-prone areas often develop thicker bark that insulates inner tissues. Trees in colder climates may develop bark patterns that reduce cracking as temperatures fluctuate. Beneath the bark, living cells monitor conditions and adjust growth accordingly. When temperatures rise in spring, these cells resume division. When conditions cool, activity slows. The trunk becomes a responsive interface between internal processes and the external world, translating environmental signals into growth patterns over time. The outer layers of a tree form a boundary between living tissue and the surrounding environment. Bark is not a single material, but a collection of layers with different roles. The outermost layer consists of dead cells filled with air and resistant compounds. This layer slows heat transfer, reduces water loss, and buffers the trunk from rapid temperature changes. In practical terms, it functions much like insulation around a building, moderating extremes rather than blocking them entirely. As bark thickens over time, it cracks and flakes in patterns shaped by growth beneath it. These patterns are not random. They reflect how the trunk expands and how outer layers respond to tension. When inner tissues add new material, outer bark must stretch or split to accommodate the increase in circumference. Species that grow quickly often develop deeper fissures, while slower growing trees maintain smoother surfaces for longer periods. Bark also limits the entry of pathogens and insects. Its chemical composition includes compounds that discourage fungal growth and feeding. These defenses are passive rather than reactive. Instead of mounting responses after damage occurs, bark reduces the likelihood of damage in the first place by making conditions less favorable for intrusion. Just beneath the bark lies the region where growth originates. Here, cells divide and differentiate, producing new transport tissue year after year. This zone remains thin throughout the tree's life, yet it is responsible for nearly all increases in thickness. Its activity depends closely on temperature and water availability. When conditions are favorable, division accelerates. When they are not, it slows without stopping entirely. Water movement upward through the trunk becomes more demanding as the canopy expands. Leaves at the top of the tree experience stronger sunlight and greater air movement, increasing evaporation. This increases tension in the water column, drawing more water upward from the roots. The system adjusts continuously. If evaporation outpaces supply, stomata partially close, reducing water loss and stabilizing pressure. This balancing act happens constantly. The tree does not calculate or decide. It responds through physical feedback. Increased tension reduces flow. Reduced flow alters leaf conditions. Leaf responses alter evaporation. The loop settles into equilibrium, maintaining movement without collapse. The efficiency of this system depends on continuity. Xylem vessels must remain filled with water. If air enters, it can interrupt flow locally. Trees minimize this risk by producing many narrow vessels rather than a few wide ones. This increases resistance slightly, but greatly reduces vulnerability, similar to using many small pipes instead of one large one. Over time, as the trunk thickens, older vessels lose their transport role and become part of the structural core. New vessels near the surface take over movement. The transport system therefore renews itself outward, maintaining function while preserving strength at the center. Inside the trunk, the movement of nutrients follows pathways that are slower and more deliberate than the upward flow of water. Sugars produced in the leaves enter phloem tissue, where they dissolve into a fluid that moves under pressure. This pressure is created when sugars accumulate in one region and are removed in another. Areas of active growth draw sugars toward them, lowering concentration locally and maintaining flow. The result is a steady redistribution of energy rather than a surge. This system allows the tree to prioritize different needs at different times. In spring, developing buds and new leaves act as strong sinks, drawing sugars upward and outward. Later in the season, roots and thickening wood become more active sinks. During periods of reduced photosynthesis, stored sugars can be remobilized and redirected. The tree behaves less like a single organism and more like a network that continuously reallocates resources. The distance sugars travel can be considerable. In tall trees, phloem transport may span tens of meters. Despite this distance, the process remains efficient because it relies on pressure gradients rather than diffusion alone. The flow rate is modest, often measured in centimeters per hour, yet it is sufficient because demand changes slowly. Growth unfolds over weeks and months, not minutes. Vertical growth adds another layer of complexity. Height increases originate at the tips of shoots, where clusters of cells divide and elongate. These regions are sensitive to light, gravity, and mechanical stress. When light is abundant, elongation slows and tissues thicken. When light is limited, elongation increases as the tree extends toward brighter space. This adjustment resembles stretching to reach a shelf rather than building a taller foundation all at once. Each year, most height growth occurs during a brief window. In many species, new shoots extend rapidly in spring, then harden and stop lengthening by early summer. After that, resources shift toward thickening existing tissues. This pattern prevents excessive exposure of soft tissue during periods when conditions may become less predictable. Over multiple years, these small increments accumulate. A tree that grows only half a meter in height each year may reach 20 meters over 4 decades. The pace feels slow when observed daily, but over time, it produces substantial change. Because growth is layered, earlier structures remain embedded within later ones, preserving the history of development within the form itself. As height increases, the cost of transport rises. Longer pathways require more energy to maintain gradients and greater structural support. Trees respond by gradually reducing height growth as they age, shifting emphasis toward stability and maintenance. This transition is not abrupt. It reflects a balance between continued expansion and the limits imposed by physics and resource availability. As the trunk continues to thicken, each year leaves behind a narrow band of newly formed wood. These bands accumulate as concentric layers, commonly known as growth rings. Their appearance reflects the conditions under which they formed. In seasons when water and temperature support steady growth, cells expand more fully before their walls thicken, creating lighter, wider bands. When conditions limit growth, cells remain smaller and walls thicken sooner, producing darker, narrower bands. This difference arises from timing rather than intention. Early in the growing season, water is often abundant and temperatures moderate. Cells focus on rapid expansion, increasing the diameter of the trunk efficiently. Later in the season, growth slows. Cells invest more in reinforcement than expansion, adding strength as the tree prepares for less favorable conditions. The contrast between these phases produces the visible ring pattern. Each ring therefore represents a cycle of activity rather than a fixed unit of time. In most temperate regions, one ring corresponds to 1 year. In other environments, growth may pause and resume more than once within a year, producing additional bands. Interpreting these patterns requires understanding local climate and species behavior, but the underlying principle remains consistent. Growth records conditions as it unfolds. The information stored in rings extends beyond width alone. Density varies within each ring, reflecting shifts in temperature and water availability. Chemical composition can also differ, preserving traces of atmospheric conditions present at the time of formation. By analyzing these variations, scientists reconstruct past rainfall patterns, droughts, and even volcanic events that altered global climate. For the tree itself, rings are not records, but reinforcements. Each new layer adds strength to the trunk, allowing it to support greater height and canopy mass. Older inner rings no longer conduct water, yet they remain integral to structural stability. The trunk functions like a layered column, where outer layers handle transport and growth, while inner layers bear load. This layered design provides resilience. Damage to the outer surface may interrupt transport locally, but inner layers continue supporting the structure. Over time, new growth can redirect flow around damaged regions, restoring continuity. The tree adapts not by repairing old tissue, but by growing past disruption. Growth rings also reflect long-term adjustment. A tree exposed to persistent wind may produce denser wood on the side facing the prevailing direction. This uneven growth strengthens the trunk where stress is greatest, gradually reshaping form to match conditions. The process resembles reinforcing a frequently used hinge rather than rebuilding an entire structure. Through these slow additions, embedded in matter, the trunk thickens not as a single event, but as a sequence of responses to repeated cycles. The visible result is a stable form that holds within it a detailed record of interaction between living tissue and environment. Growth in trees is often described as slow, but this slowness serves a purpose. Rapid growth produces large cells with thin walls, which allows quick expansion but limits strength. Slower growth produces smaller cells with thicker walls, increasing density and resistance. Trees adjust this balance continuously. In favorable conditions, growth accelerates. When conditions tighten, growth slows, trading speed for durability. This trade-off shapes the character of different species. Trees that grow quickly tend to occupy open spaces, reaching light before competitors. Their wood is often lighter and more flexible. Trees that grow slowly invest early in dense tissue, tolerating shade and persisting beneath taller neighbors. Neither strategy is better in general. Each reflects adaptation to a particular set of conditions. Steady growth also spreads risk. By adding small increments over long periods, trees avoid committing too much energy at once. If a year proves unfavorable, only a thin layer reflects that constraint. The underlying structure remains intact. This approach resembles gradual savings rather than a single large investment, favoring persistence over rapid return. Flexibility is as important as strength. Trees bend in wind because their tissues allow controlled movement. Cell walls contain cellulose fibers arranged in patterns that resist tearing while permitting deformation. When wind loads increase, trunks and branches sway, dissipating energy rather than opposing it rigidly. This movement reduces the likelihood of breakage, especially during storms. Flexibility varies along the tree. Younger tissues near the outer surface bend more easily. Older inner wood remains rigid. This gradient allows the tree to absorb motion at the edges while maintaining overall stability. The structure functions like a layered spring, stiff at the core and elastic at the surface. Branches follow similar principles. Their attachment angles distribute weight and reduce leverage. As branches thicken, their orientation may shift slightly, adjusting balance as the canopy expands. These changes are gradual, emerging from differential growth rather than sudden repositioning. Over time, repeated movement influences growth patterns. Areas experiencing consistent stress accumulate denser wood, reinforcing frequently loaded regions. This phenomenon, known as adaptive growth, allows trees to tailor their structure to prevailing conditions. Wind, slope, and canopy distribution all contribute, shaping form through repeated exposure rather than isolated events. The result is a structure that appears static but is continuously refined. Each season adds a small adjustment. Over decades, these adjustments accumulate into a form well matched to its environment. Stability emerges not from resisting change, but from accommodating it incrementally. Leaves are the primary sites where energy enters the tree. Their broad, thin surfaces expose internal tissues to sunlight, allowing light to penetrate layers of cells where it can be absorbed by chlorophyll. This pigment captures specific wavelengths of light, and initiates a chain of reactions that convert carbon dioxide and water into sugars. The process is powered by sunlight, but it unfolds through carefully regulated chemical steps rather than a single reaction. The structure of a leaf reflects this role. Just beneath the surface, tightly packed cells absorb light efficiently. Deeper layers contain spaces filled with air, allowing gases to move freely. Carbon dioxide enters through small openings, while oxygen produced during photosynthesis diffuses out. These openings, called stomata, also allow water vapor to escape. Their behavior links energy capture to water balance. Photosynthesis depends on timing as much as light. When sunlight is abundant and water supply is steady, reactions proceed smoothly. When water becomes limited, stomata partially close to reduce loss. This protects the tree from dehydration, but also slows carbon intake. The balance shifts continuously, responding to conditions minute by minute. The tree does not maximize photosynthesis at all costs. It maintains equilibrium. Sugars produced in leaves serve multiple purposes. Some are used locally to maintain leaf tissue. Others are converted into starch and stored temporarily. The remainder enters transport pathways, moving toward growing or storage tissues elsewhere. This distribution allows leaves to act as energy gateways rather than endpoints. Leaf arrangement across branches follows predictable patterns. Angles and spacing reduce overlap, ensuring light reaches multiple layers of the canopy. This arrangement emerges as leaves respond individually to light intensity during development. Leaves that form in shade grow larger and thinner. Leaves exposed to strong sunlight grow smaller and thicker. Each adapts to its local environment without reference to the whole. Energy capture therefore becomes distributed across the canopy. No single leaf dominates. Instead, many surfaces contribute modestly, smoothing supply across time. This redundancy reduces vulnerability. Damage to some leaves does not halt production. Others continue functioning, maintaining flow. The chemical machinery within leaves also responds to temperature. Reaction rates increase with warmth up to an optimum, then decline as proteins lose stability. Trees adjust enzyme composition to suit their climate, fine-tuning efficiency. This adjustment occurs over seasons rather than moments, aligning leaf chemistry with prevailing conditions. Through leaves, trees connect solar energy to the slow construction of wood, roots, and future leaves. Light captured today may support growth months later or be stored to fuel activity in the following year. The timing separates cause from effect, reinforcing the gradual nature of tree growth. Once energy is captured in the leaves, it enters a wider internal circulation that connects every part of the tree. Sugars produced during photosynthesis dissolve into sap and move through phloem tissue toward regions where they are needed. This movement is guided by pressure differences rather than direction or intention. Where sugars accumulate, pressure increases. Where sugars are removed for growth or storage, pressure decreases. Sap flows along this gradient, linking sources, and sinks throughout the structure. This circulation allows energy to be used flexibly. During periods of active growth, developing shoots and expanding roots draw heavily on the supply. Later in the season, when growth slows, sugars are redirected into storage. Starch accumulates in roots, lower trunks, and specialized tissues, forming reserves that can persist through months of low photosynthetic activity. These reserves are not idle. They remain chemically accessible, ready to be converted back into sugars when needed. Water movement and energy movement remain closely coupled. As water rises through xylem vessels, it supports leaf function and maintains cell pressure. As sugars move through phloem, they influence water distribution by altering osmotic conditions. The two systems interact continuously, adjusting flow rates and directions as conditions change. This coordination ensures that growth remains proportional rather than excessive in any one area. Within cells, energy is transferred and transformed through metabolic pathways. Sugars are broken down to release energy for maintenance and construction. Some energy is used immediately. Some is invested in building complex molecules such as cellulose and lignin, which become part of the tree's physical structure. Once incorporated, this energy remains locked in place, sometimes for centuries, contributing to long-term stability rather than short-term activity. Distribution patterns shift with age. Young trees direct a large proportion of energy toward height and root expansion. Mature trees allocate more toward maintenance, reproduction, and storage. This shift reflects changing priorities rather than decline. As structural demands stabilize, the tree invests in sustaining existing tissue and preparing for future cycles. The internal movement of energy also buffers variation. A cloudy week or dry spell does not halt growth immediately. Stored reserves smooth short-term fluctuations, allowing processes to continue at reduced rates. Over longer periods, sustained changes alter allocation patterns, gradually reshaping form. Through this internal circulation, trees convert brief moments of sunlight into long-lasting structure. Energy enters quickly, moves slowly, and settles into wood and roots over time. This extended timescale separates capture from outcome, reinforcing the steady pace that defines tree growth. Leaves form the main interface between the tree and the surrounding air. Along their surfaces are thousands of small openings that regulate the exchange of gases. These openings allow carbon dioxide to enter for photosynthesis and oxygen to leave as a byproduct. At the same time, water vapor escapes. This loss of water is not accidental. It is a necessary consequence of gas exchange, and it drives much of the internal movement of water through the tree. Each opening is controlled by a pair of specialized cells that respond to light, humidity, and internal water status. When conditions are favorable, these cells swell slightly, opening the pore. When water becomes scarce or air grows dry, they relax and narrow the opening. This regulation balances two needs that often compete. The tree must acquire carbon to build tissue, but it must also conserve water to maintain structure. The escape of water vapor from leaves creates a pulling force that extends down through the trunk to the roots. As water evaporates, it draws more water upward behind it. This process operates continuously during daylight hours, linking atmospheric conditions directly to soil moisture. On a warm, breezy day, evaporation increases and flow accelerates. On a cool, still day, movement slows. The amount of water involved can be substantial. A large tree may move hundreds of liters of water from soil to air in a single day. This water does not disappear. It enters the local atmosphere, contributing to humidity and, at larger scales, influencing weather patterns. In this way, individual trees participate in broader cycles that extend beyond their immediate surroundings. Inside the leaf, water plays additional roles. It maintains cell shape, allowing tissues to remain firm. It transports dissolved minerals delivered from the roots. It moderates temperature through evaporation, preventing overheating during intense sunlight. These functions reinforce one another, making water movement central to nearly every aspect of leaf function. Gas exchange also responds to internal rhythms. During daylight, openings tend to widen. At night, they often close, conserving water when photosynthesis cannot proceed. This daily cycle reduces unnecessary loss and aligns internal processes with external conditions. The timing is flexible. Extended cloud cover or high humidity can alter patterns, adjusting behavior without disruption. The coordination between gas exchange and water movement demonstrates how trees integrate multiple systems into a single response. No part operates independently. Changes in air temperature affect evaporation. Evaporation affects water flow. Water flow influences leaf chemistry. Leaf chemistry feeds back into opening behavior. Through these loops, trees maintain stability in changing conditions. Leaves vary widely in shape, thickness, and texture, and these differences are closely tied to how trees manage light, water, and temperature. A broad, thin leaf captures light efficiently in shaded environments, where sunlight arrives scattered and weak. A narrower or thicker leaf reduces surface area, limiting water loss and overheating in brighter, drier conditions. These forms are not decorative, they are physical solutions to environmental constraints. The structure of a leaf determines how heat moves through it. Thin leaves warm quickly, but also cool quickly. Thick leaves change temperature more slowly, buffering internal tissues from rapid swings. In hot environments, this buffering prevents damage to the proteins involved in photosynthesis. In cooler environments, faster warming can extend the effective growing period during short days. Leaf form therefore adjusts not only energy capture, but also timing. Veins within leaves distribute water and provide support. Their branching patterns follow principles similar to river networks, minimizing resistance while reaching all regions. Water delivered through these veins replaces what is lost to evaporation, maintaining pressure and transport. At the same time, sugars produced within leaf tissue move back toward the veins, entering the broader circulation. The leaf functions as both collector and distributor. Some trees retain their leaves year-round, others shed them seasonally. Evergreen trees invest in leaves built to last several years. These leaves are often thicker, with protective coatings that reduce water loss and resist damage. The cost of building such leaves is higher, but it is paid back over time as the leaves continue functioning across multiple seasons. Deciduous trees follow a different strategy. Their leaves are designed for efficiency rather than durability. During favorable seasons, they capture energy rapidly. As conditions change, these leaves are shed. Before release, valuable nutrients are withdrawn and stored elsewhere in the tree. The remaining leaf tissue is discarded, reducing water loss and mechanical stress during colder or drier periods. Neither approach is superior in all settings. Evergreen strategies suit environments where conditions remain relatively stable or where nutrients are scarce. Deciduous strategies suit regions with strong seasonal contrasts, where temporary shutdown reduces risk. Both reflect adaptation to long-term patterns rather than short-term fluctuations. Leaf turnover influences internal cycles. When leaves fall or are replaced, energy allocation shifts. Storage tissues become more important. Roots and trunks serve as reservoirs, sustaining the tree until new leaves emerge or existing ones resume full activity. This rhythmic exchange between presence and absence shapes annual growth patterns. Through variation in leaf form and retention, trees balance efficiency, durability, and timing. These choices emerge gradually, shaped by repeated exposure to local conditions. Over years and decades, leaf strategies contribute as much to a tree's success as height or root depth. As seasons shift, changes in daylight and temperature alter the balance inside the tree. Leaves respond first because they are directly exposed to these external cues. As days shorten, the angle of sunlight lowers and total energy received declines. Inside leaves, the rate of photosynthesis slows. Sugars are still produced, but at reduced levels. At the same time, internal signals begin to change, redirecting resources away from maintenance of leaf tissue. Before leaves are released, valuable materials are withdrawn. Nitrogen, phosphorus, and other nutrients are transported out of the leaf and stored in branches, trunks, and roots. This transfer happens gradually, over days or weeks, ensuring that little is wasted. What remains behind are structural components and pigments that no longer serve an active role. Chlorophyll breaks down during this process. As it fades, other pigments that were previously masked become visible. These pigments do not appear for display. They are always present, involved in light handling and protection. Their visibility is simply a consequence of changing chemistry. Once nutrient recovery is complete, a thin layer of cells forms at the base of the leaf stalk, weakening the connection. Wind, gravity, or the leaf's own weight eventually completes the separation. The leaf falls, leaving behind a sealed surface that limits water loss and prevents infection. The process is controlled and localized. Tissue beyond the separation point remains intact. Nothing is torn or exposed. For the tree, this release reduces ongoing costs. Without leaves, water loss declines sharply. Internal water reserves stabilize. Energy demand drops. The tree shifts into a maintenance state, sustaining existing tissue rather than building new structures. This transition is not inactivity. Internal processes continue, but at a slower pace. The timing of leaf loss varies by species and location. Some trees release leaves quickly once conditions change. Others retain them longer, responding to specific temperature thresholds or moisture levels. These differences reflect local adaptation rather than universal rules. Through this seasonal cycle, trees align growth with long-term patterns. Rather than resisting change, they anticipate it through gradual adjustment. Leaf loss becomes part of continuity, not interruption, preserving internal balance as external conditions shift. As one growth cycle ends, another is already forming within the structure of the tree. Even during periods of reduced activity, buds develop quietly at the tips of branches. Inside each bud are compacted leaves or shoots, pre-formed months in advance. Their shape and number were determined during the previous growing season, based on the resources available at that time. This advanced planning allows growth to resume quickly when conditions improve. When temperatures rise and daylight increases, internal chemistry shifts. Stored starch is converted back into sugars and mobilized toward developing buds. Water movement increases as soil thaws, and roots regain access to liquid moisture. Pressure builds within tissues, causing cells in buds to expand. Protective outer scales separate, and new growth emerges. Spring growth is often rapid compared to other times of year. This speed is possible because much of the work was completed earlier. The tree is not building new structures from nothing. It is unfolding and enlarging what already exists. Cell division and elongation proceed together, extending shoots and expanding leaves in coordinated bursts. This burst of activity draws heavily on stored reserves, roots, trunks, and older wood supply energy and minerals until new leaves become fully functional. During this phase, the balance temporarily shifts away from storage toward investment. Once leaves mature and photosynthesis increases, reserves are gradually replenished. Year-to-year growth follows patterns shaped by past conditions. A tree that experienced favorable conditions the previous year may produce more buds and stronger shoots. A tree that endured limited resources may scale back, producing fewer or smaller buds. These decisions are embedded structurally rather than made in the moment, tying future growth to past experience. Over successive years, these patterns accumulate. Growth may accelerate during extended favorable periods and slow during prolonged stress. The tree integrates these fluctuations over time, producing a form that reflects averages rather than extremes. Height, spread, and density emerge as records of repeated seasonal responses. This long view allows trees to persist where short-term strategies would fail. Rather than maximizing output in a single season, they distribute growth across many years. Each cycle builds on the last, creating continuity rather than peaks and collapses. As spring expansion settles, growth enters a steadier phase. During summer, leaves reach full size, and photosynthesis operates near its seasonal maximum. Light levels remain high, days are long, and temperatures often support efficient chemical reactions. Under these conditions, the tree focuses less on producing new shoots and more on consolidating what has already formed. Resources are directed toward thickening stems, expanding roots, and strengthening supporting tissues. Water demand increases during this period. Warm air and active leaves raise evaporation rates, drawing larger volumes of water upward from the soil. Roots respond by increasing absorption where moisture is available. Fine roots proliferate in upper soil layers after rainfall, then withdraw or become inactive as those layers dry. This constant adjustment allows the tree to track shifting water availability without relocating its entire root system. At the same time, internal transport becomes more selective. Sugars continue moving through phloem, but growth sinks change character. Instead of feeding elongation at shoot tips, energy supports cell wall thickening and lignin deposition. These processes strengthen wood, improving resistance to bending and compression. The result is a gradual increase in density rather than size. Summer is also a period of assessment. Hormonal signals influenced by light and temperature regulate whether additional buds will be formed for the following year. If conditions remain favorable, the tree invests in future potential. If conditions become limiting, bud production may be reduced, lowering demand in the next cycle. These adjustments occur quietly, encoded into structure rather than behavior. As summer progresses, growth rates begin to slow. This slowing is not caused by a single trigger. It reflects the combined effects of changing day length, cumulative resource use, and internal signaling. Cells divide less frequently. Elongation decreases. The emphasis shifts from expansion toward preparation. This gradual deceleration avoids abrupt transitions. Tissues have time to mature, transport pathways stabilize, storage compartments fill. By the time external conditions begin to change more noticeably, much of the internal adjustment is already complete. Through this extended phase, the tree maintains balance. It uses abundant energy to reinforce itself, while quietly adjusting expectations for the coming season. Growth does not stop suddenly. It tapers, aligning internal processes with the slow approach of change. As external conditions continue to shift, internal activity enters a quieter phase. Lower temperatures and reduced daylight slow chemical reactions throughout the tree. Photosynthesis declines as leaves become less active or are no longer present. Water movement decreases because evaporation from leaf surfaces is minimal. The internal pace adjusts, not toward inactivity, but toward conservation. During this period, the tree relies heavily on reserves accumulated earlier. Starches stored in roots and inner wood remain chemically stable, available to support essential processes. Respiration continues at a reduced rate, supplying energy for cell maintenance and repair. Even in apparent stillness, metabolism persists, sustaining the integrity of living tissue. Cells within the trunk and roots remain hydrated, protected by structural features that limit freezing damage. In many species, dissolved sugars and other compounds lower the freezing point of cellular fluids. This reduces ice formation inside cells, preventing mechanical damage. Water may freeze in spaces between cells instead, where expansion causes less harm. These adjustments occur through gradual changes in concentration rather than sudden shifts. Roots deeper in the soil experience smaller temperature fluctuations than surface tissues. This buffering allows limited absorption to continue when liquid water is available. Even minimal uptake helps maintain pressure balance within the system. The tree does not require large flows during this phase. Stability matters more than supply. While outward growth is paused, internal organization continues. Transport tissues remain intact. Buds formed earlier stay, protected by overlapping scales that insulate delicate structures. Hormonal signals maintain dormancy, preventing premature activation during temporary warm spells. This restraint avoids exposure to conditions that could reverse quickly. The tree's structure during this phase reflects preparation rather than response. Wood laid down earlier provides strength. Bark limits moisture loss and moderates temperature changes. Stored reserves ensure continuity. Together, these features allow the tree to persist through periods when active growth would be inefficient or risky. This phase does not mark an end. It is part of a longer cycle in which activity concentrates during favorable periods and withdraws during others. By slowing internal processes rather than stopping them, the tree preserves readiness, maintaining connection between past growth and future expansion. During extended periods of limited growth, the tree shifts from expansion to regulation. Energy use becomes tightly controlled. Respiration continues at a low level, just sufficient to sustain living cells and preserve structural integrity. This conservation prevents depletion of reserves while keeping essential systems functional. The tree is not waiting passively, it is maintaining balance. Water distribution remains important even when uptake is minimal. Pressure within tissues must stay within a narrow range to avoid collapse or damage. Stored water within cells contributes to this stability. Structural components of cell walls help maintain shape even as temperatures fluctuate. These physical properties reduce reliance on active transport, allowing the tree to persist with minimal movement. Over longer timescales, trees respond to persistent shifts rather than short events. A sequence of drier years alters root allocation, encouraging deeper penetration where moisture remains available. Prolonged cooler conditions may shorten the active growing season, leading to more compact annual growth. These adjustments accumulate slowly, reflecting averages rather than extremes. Recovery follows the same principle. When conditions improve after a limiting period, growth does not surge immediately. Stored reserves support gradual reactivation. Transport pathways re-establish steady flow. Leaves or needles resume full function only after tissues stabilize. This moderation prevents overextension that could increase vulnerability if conditions reverse again. The capacity to conserve and recover is central to longevity. Trees that persist for centuries have experienced many cycles of abundance and limitation. Their survival depends not on maximizing output in favorable years, but on avoiding irreversible loss in unfavorable ones. This strategy favors continuity over speed. Long-term responses also shape interactions with surrounding organisms. Root systems may alter depth and spread, influencing soil structure and moisture retention. Canopy density may adjust, changing light availability below. These changes feed back into the local environment, subtly reshaping conditions that influence future growth. Through conservation and gradual adjustment, trees remain aligned with their surroundings. They do not resist long-term change. They absorb it, integrating new conditions into existing structure. The result is persistence through variability, grounded in steady regulation rather than rapid response. Over long spans of time, the most important changes in a tree are not dramatic events, but gradual shifts in balance. Growth does not follow a straight line. It curves gently in response to accumulated conditions. A series of slightly warmer years may increase overall height and canopy spread. A series of slightly drier years may redirect growth downward, extending roots deeper while slowing expansion above ground. These adjustments are small when viewed individually, but together they shape the long-term form of the tree. This gradual change is guided by feedback rather than foresight. When water becomes harder to access near the surface, root growth follows moisture gradients downward. As deeper roots supply a greater proportion of water, leaf behavior adjusts, reducing evaporation during peak heat. This change alters internal pressure and energy use, which then feeds back into growth patterns. The system settles into a new equilibrium without ever fully stopping or restarting. Wood density often increases during extended periods of slower growth. Cells formed under constrained conditions tend to have thicker walls and smaller internal spaces. This increases strength and resistance to decay. Although overall expansion slows, structural quality improves. Over decades, this trade-off contributes to longevity, allowing the tree to withstand mechanical stress and internal degradation more effectively. Changes in canopy structure also unfold gradually. Branches that receive consistent light continue to thicken and persist. Those that remain shaded for many seasons may slow their growth until maintenance costs exceed benefit. Resource flow decreases, tissues weaken, and eventually these branches are shed. This process is not abrupt. It can take years. During that time, The tree continuously reassesses allocation through pressure and flow rather than decision. At the scale of a forest, these individual adjustments interact. As trees grow and adjust, they alter light patterns, wind flow, and soil moisture. These changes influence neighboring trees, which in turn adjust their own growth. Over long periods, forest structure emerges from these interactions, reflecting collective responses to climate, soil, and time, rather than a fixed design. Patience is not a quality, but a consequence of this system. Because trees integrate conditions slowly, they avoid overreacting to short-term variation. A single harsh season leaves a narrow trace. A sustained shift reshapes form. This filtering allows trees to remain stable in environments that fluctuate from year to year. The result is continuity across generations. Even when individual trees age and decline, their structures influence what follows. Roots alter soil composition. Fallen wood contributes organic matter. Microbial communities shaped by long-term presence persist. New growth emerges within conditions shaped by earlier growth, extending influence beyond the lifespan of any single organism. Through this steady accumulation of small adjustments, trees become records of place. Their form reflects not only their own biology, but the history of their surroundings. Change is absorbed, translated into structure, and carried forward, linking past conditions to present form without interruption. As a tree continues through its life, the pace of visible change becomes slower, but internal activity never fully settles. Growth shifts away from expansion and toward maintenance, adjustment, and renewal. The structure that has formed over decades now serves as both framework and buffer, allowing the tree to persist through conditions that would overwhelm less established plants. Maintenance involves constant small-scale repair. Cells replace damaged components. Transport tissues adjust flow around areas that no longer function efficiently. Chemical gradients are recalibrated to match current demand. None of this requires new construction at the scale seen earlier in life. It relies on preserving what already exists and keeping pathways open. The distribution of resources becomes increasingly conservative. Energy captured by leaves supports respiration, storage, and limited growth where needed. Excess allocation toward height or spread diminishes, not because growth is impossible, but because returns decrease. Taller height increases transport costs. Wider spread increases exposure. The system naturally favors stability once sufficient reach has been achieved. This balance also shapes how trees respond to disturbance over long periods. When part of the canopy is lost, remaining tissues redistribute resources. Dormant buds may activate slowly, replacing lost structure over multiple seasons. Root systems adjust uptake patterns to match reduced demand above ground. Recovery unfolds gradually, guided by availability rather than urgency. Time smooths variation. Short periods of abundance do not immediately alter form. Short periods of limitation do not erase it. Only sustained trends influence structure in lasting ways. This filtering allows trees to persist across centuries of fluctuating conditions, integrating change rather than reacting sharply to it. As trees age, their influence on the surrounding environment deepens. Soil beneath them accumulates organic matter. Moisture retention improves. Microbial communities stabilize. These changes feed back into the tree itself, moderating extremes and supporting continued function. The system becomes increasingly self-reinforcing. The slow pace that defines tree growth is therefore not delay. it is regulation. Each process unfolds at a speed that matches physical limits and environmental variability. Through this alignment, trees maintain continuity between past growth and present function, remaining active participants in their environment without requiring rapid change. In this way, trees persist not by resisting time, but by moving with it. Growth, adjustment, and maintenance merge into a single long process, carrying structure forward while remaining open to gradual transformation. As a tree reaches maturity, its canopy changes how light moves through the space around it. Sunlight no longer reaches the ground evenly. Instead, it arrives in shifting patches as leaves and branches intercept it. Areas directly beneath the crown receive brief periods of light, followed by longer stretches of shade. This pattern lowers surface temperatures and reduces evaporation from the soil below. Leaf litter accumulates gradually beneath the tree. Fallen leaves settle, compress, and begin to break down. As they decompose, organic material mixes with mineral soil, increasing its ability to hold water while still allowing air to move through it. Rain that falls onto this surface is less likely to run off. More of it enters the ground, where it remains available for longer periods. Roots reinforce these conditions. As fine roots grow and later die back, they leave behind narrow channels. These channels guide water downward during rainfall and allow oxygen to reach deeper layers. Over time, the soil beneath the tree becomes more structured and less prone to drying quickly after surface moisture disappears. Temperature variation also narrows. Shading reduces daytime heating. At night, retained moisture and organic matter slow cooling. These effects stabilize conditions close to the ground, creating an environment that changes more slowly than open areas nearby. Within this moderated space, smaller organisms persist more reliably. Insects remain active longer during dry periods because humidity stays higher. Microbial activity continues because moisture and organic inputs remain steady. Fungi extend through enriched soil, breaking down complex material and releasing nutrients back into circulation. As these organisms remain active, they alter the soil further. Decomposition proceeds at a measured pace. Nutrients become available in forms roots can absorb. The ground beneath the tree shifts gradually toward a condition that supports continued growth rather than rapid loss. The physical structure of a mature tree also provides stable spaces above ground. As branches thicken and age, internal wood changes density. Small cavities develop where tissue no longer conducts water efficiently. These spaces form slowly and remain sheltered from direct exposure, maintaining relatively constant internal conditions across seasons. Bark texture contributes additional surface complexity. Deepening ridges and fissures retain moisture after rainfall. Fine particles of organic material collect within them. These sheltered zones support insects, mosses, and lichens that remain attached to the surface without drawing on internal resources. The canopy itself forms vertical layers. Upper branches experience stronger light and greater temperature variation. Lower branches remain shaded and cooler. This layering creates distinct zones that differ in exposure, humidity, and airflow. Organisms distribute themselves across these zones according to tolerance and need. Activity within these layers influences the tree subtly. Insects affect leaf turnover rates. Birds contribute nutrients through waste deposited on branches and soil. These inputs alter local nutrient distribution without disrupting internal transport systems. Through its size and persistence, the tree maintains a stable framework that supports ongoing biological activity. The structure remains in place while conditions change around it, allowing interactions to continue without interruption. Movement through the tree does not stop at its surface. Animals interact with trees in ways that alter how material is distributed across the system. Birds perch on branches, rest within the canopy, and travel repeatedly between feeding sites. As they move, they carry small amounts of organic matter on their bodies and deposit waste that contains concentrated nutrients. These deposits fall onto leaves, branches, and soil, adding nitrogen and phosphorus in small but repeated amounts. Insects contribute through feeding and movement. Some consume leaves, others bore into bark, and many simply pass across surfaces. Leaf feeding removes tissue, but it also stimulates replacement growth. When a portion of leaf area is lost, remaining leaves often increase photosynthetic activity, partially compensating for reduction. This response redistributes energy use rather than halting it. Insects moving along branches and trunks disturb surface material. Fine particles of organic matter trapped in bark crevices are dislodged and fall to the ground. This material adds to soil inputs beneath the tree, reinforcing the gradual accumulation of organic matter. Over time, these small transfers influence nutrient availability near the root zone. Mammals interact differently. Some climb, others shelter beneath branches, and some feed on fruits or seeds produced by the tree. In doing so, they relocate material away from the canopy. Seeds carried and cached elsewhere change where future trees may establish. Even when seeds are consumed, nutrients return to the soil through waste, redistributed beyond the immediate base of the tree. These interactions alter patterns of growth indirectly. Nutrient inputs shift root development toward enriched areas. Localized increases in nitrogen support leaf production in nearby branches. The tree responds through internal transport rather than external movement, adjusting allocation to match altered availability. Through repeated contact, animals contribute to the circulation of matter around the tree, influencing growth without disrupting structural continuity. Below ground, soil processes continue shaping how the tree interacts with its environment. Organic material added at the surface breaks down gradually as microorganisms consume it. During decomposition, complex compounds are converted into simpler forms that dissolve in soil water. These dissolved nutrients move short distances through the soil, entering zones where roots can absorb them. Water movement through soil carries these nutrients downward. In well-structured soil, water infiltrates rather than pooling. This movement distributes nutrients through root zones rather than concentrating them at the surface. Roots growing into these zones encounter more consistent supply, supporting steady uptake rather than sporadic pulses. As roots absorb nutrients, they alter local chemistry. The uptake of positively charged ions changes acidity near the root surface. In response, soil particles release additional nutrients that were previously bound. This exchange occurs continuously at small scales, maintaining balance between soil reserves and plant demand. Root growth and decay also influence soil structure. Living roots exert pressure that separates soil particles slightly. When roots die back, spaces remain. These spaces allow air and water to move more freely, supporting microbial activity and further decomposition. Over time, soil beneath trees develops a layered structure shaped by repeated cycles of root expansion and retreat. These underground processes unfold slowly, but their effects accumulate. The soil becomes more stable, better aerated, and more capable of retaining moisture. This condition supports continued root function, reinforcing the long-term presence of the tree in that location. Soil beneath long-standing trees develops a structure that reflects repeated movement of water over time. Rain that falls onto the canopy is slowed as it passes through leaves and branches. Droplets reach the ground with less force, spreading across the surface rather than striking it directly. This reduces surface compaction and allows water to enter the soil more evenly. Once in the soil, water follows pathways shaped by roots, organic matter, and mineral particles. Spaces created by decayed roots guide water downward, while organic material absorbs and holds moisture. This combination prevents rapid drainage while avoiding prolonged saturation. The result is a balance where water remains available without excluding air, supporting both roots and microorganisms. As water moves, it redistributes dissolved materials. Nutrients released during decomposition travel short distances, entering zones where roots are active. Because movement is gradual, concentrations remain moderate rather than extreme. This steady delivery supports consistent uptake instead of brief surges followed by depletion. Soil stability increases as these processes repeat. Aggregates form as organic compounds bind particles together. These aggregates resist erosion and maintain pore space. During heavy rainfall, soil remains intact. During dry periods, retained moisture slows desiccation. The ground beneath the tree becomes less responsive to short-term weather and more aligned with seasonal patterns. Roots respond to this stability by maintaining presence rather than retreating. Fine roots persist longer, extending functional lifespan. This persistence reduces the need for constant regeneration, lowering energy cost while maintaining access to water and nutrients. Water movement continues beyond the immediate root zone, linking individual trees to broader landscape processes. In forested areas, coordinated infiltration across many trees reduces surface runoff. Streams receive water more gradually, extending flow during dry periods and reducing sudden surges after storms. This moderation alters erosion patterns and sediment transport downstream. Within the soil, water moving laterally connects neighboring root systems. Moisture gradients shift slowly, allowing roots to follow changing availability without abrupt loss. Trees growing close together influence each other through these shared conditions, adjusting uptake patterns as local supply changes. Evaporation from leaves also contributes to water circulation. Moisture released into the air increases local humidity, which can reduce further evaporation from soil and leaf surfaces. In dense stands, this effect becomes measurable, creating cooler, more humid microclimates compared to open ground. Through these combined processes, trees influence water distribution far beyond their own tissues. Their presence alters how water enters, moves through, and leaves the land. Over time, this influence becomes embedded in soil structure, stream behavior, and local climate patterns, reinforcing conditions that support continued growth. Air moves differently around and within groups of trees. As wind passes through a canopy, Leaves and branches slow it, breaking a steady flow into smaller currents. This reduction in speed lowers evaporation from soil and leaf surfaces. It also moderates temperature by reducing heat loss during cooler periods and limiting heat buildup during warmer ones. The effect is most noticeable near the ground, where conditions become more stable than in open areas. Leaves contribute directly to air composition through gas exchange. During daylight, carbon dioxide enters leaves and oxygen is released. While the amount released by a single tree is modest, the combined effect across many trees becomes significant. Oxygen mixes into surrounding air, while carbon becomes incorporated into sugars and then into wood, roots, and soil. This transfer shifts carbon from the atmosphere into long-lived structures. The movement of air through the canopy also affects leaf behavior. Gentle airflow helps regulate temperature and reduces the buildup of moisture on leaf surfaces. This limits conditions that favor surface decay while maintaining adequate gas exchange. Trees respond by adjusting the density and orientation of leaves, shaping how air moves through different canopy layers. At a larger scale, groups of trees influence atmospheric conditions above them. Moisture released through transpiration increases humidity, which can lower local temperatures during warm periods. In forested regions, this moisture contributes to cloud formation and precipitation patterns, linking biological activity to weather processes over time. Within forests, balance emerges from the interaction of many individual trees. Canopies overlap, roots intermingle, and shared conditions influence growth across the stand. Light becomes a shared resource, filtered through layers rather than delivered directly. Water availability reflects collective uptake and release. Soil conditions stabilize through repeated cycles of input and retention. As trees grow at different rates, gaps form naturally. When light reaches the forest floor, new growth establishes in these spaces. Over time, these younger trees alter conditions again, closing gaps and restoring shade. This ongoing process maintains continuity without uniformity. Nutrient movement follows similar patterns. Organic material falls across the forest floor and decomposes. Nutrients enter soil gradually and are absorbed by roots nearby. Because trees differ in size and demand, uptake varies, distributing growth rather than concentrating it. Through these overlapping processes, forests maintain a dynamic balance. Change occurs continuously, but it unfolds at a pace that preserves structure. Individual trees adjust within this shared environment, contributing to conditions that support long-term persistence. As time passes within a forest, continuity depends on overlap rather than replacement. Older trees remain, while younger ones establish beneath or nearby. This overlap ensures that light, water, and nutrients are never withdrawn entirely from the system. When a large tree slows its growth or declines, surrounding trees adjust uptake and expansion gradually, filling space without sudden change. The forest maintains presence through redistribution rather than interruption. Connections below ground support this continuity. Root systems occupy different depths and zones, reducing direct competition while sharing broader conditions. Moisture drawn from deeper layers by larger trees can influence surface humidity through transpiration, indirectly benefiting smaller plants. Nutrients released during decomposition are absorbed locally, maintaining circulation within the same area over long periods. Above ground, Canopy structure changes slowly. Branches thicken, angles adjust, and light pathways shift incrementally. These adjustments alter temperature and airflow without abrupt exposure. The forest interior remains buffered from extremes, preserving conditions that support ongoing biological activity. Over decades, these patterns repeat. Growth, slowing, and adjustment occur simultaneously across many individuals. The system remains active without requiring synchrony. Stability emerges from staggered timing rather than uniform behavior. Interconnection extends across scales. Processes occurring within individual trees influence neighbors, and collective activity alters conditions across the forest. Water movement, airflow, and nutrient cycling remain linked through repeated interaction. The forest persists not as a fixed structure, but as a continuous process shaped by gradual change. Some trees remain in place for periods that extend far beyond a human lifetime. Their longevity depends on slow growth, durable structure, and the ability to limit damage rather than eliminate it. Dense wood formed over many years resist decay because fewer spaces remain for fungi and insects to penetrate. Transport tissues renew near the surface, while older inner wood remains sealed and inactive, reducing internal vulnerability. As trees age, growth rate often decreases, but survival increases. Energy allocation shifts toward maintenance and defense. Chemical compounds within bark and wood discourage decay organisms. Structural reinforcement accumulates, allowing trunks and branches to withstand repeated stress from wind and weight. This gradual strengthening supports persistence over centuries. In some environments, conditions further support long life. Cold temperatures slow decay. Dry air limits fungal growth. Sparse soils reduce competition. Under these conditions, individual trees can remain alive for thousands of years, adding only thin layers of growth each season while retaining structural integrity. Ancient trees reflect these processes clearly. Bristlecone pines, for example, grow slowly in harsh, high-elevation environments. Limited moisture and nutrients restrict expansion, producing dense wood that resists decay. Many remain alive, even when large portions of the trunk are no longer active. Living tissue continues to transport water and nutrients through narrow bands, sustaining foliage while inactive wood remains as support. Clonal systems extend longevity further. In some species, individual trunks die and are replaced while the root system persists. New growth emerges from the same genetic structure, maintaining continuity for thousands of years. These systems blur the boundary between individual and lineage, persisting through repeated renewal rather than uninterrupted growth. Through slow accumulation, reinforcement, and renewal, trees maintain presence across deep time, carrying forward conditions established long before current surroundings took shape. Slow growth contributes to longevity by limiting internal stress. When cells expand gradually, their walls thicken evenly and remain well aligned. This reduces the formation of weak points where cracks or decay might begin. Over many years, this careful construction produces wood that tolerates repeated loading from wind and shifting weight without failing. The tree becomes more resistant, not by reacting to damage, but by preventing it through structure. Time also allows trees to adjust to their surroundings incrementally. Branches that experience consistent strain strengthen through added growth, while those that contribute little gradually receive fewer resources. This selective reinforcement concentrates material where it is most effective. Over decades, the tree's form becomes closely matched to local conditions, reducing unnecessary exposure and conserving energy. Even when parts of a tree decline, the overall system continues functioning. Transport pathways reroute around inactive regions. Growth proceeds at the margins rather than the center. This outward renewal allows trees to remain viable despite internal loss, extending lifespan beyond what uniform replacement would permit. The passage of time also integrates change into continuity. Environmental conditions shift, but trees respond only when changes persist. Short periods of stress leave minimal trace. Sustained trends reshape growth patterns slowly, embedding adjustment into structure. This filtering allows trees to remain stable across centuries of variable conditions. Eventually, all trees reach a point where growth slows to a near standstill. This does not mark failure. It reflects a balance where maintenance fully occupies available resources. The tree persists by holding what it has built, continuing internal circulation and repair, while external expansion becomes minimal. Through this long process, an active component of structure, each year adds a small adjustment. Over centuries, these adjustments accumulate into a form capable of enduring conditions far beyond those present at the moment of establishment. Growth that unfolds slowly changes how wood is built at the cellular level. Cells expand in smaller steps, and their walls thicken evenly as they mature. This produces dense tissue with fewer gaps where moisture and organisms could enter. The result is wood that resists decay and mechanical damage more effectively than wood formed during rapid expansion. Over many seasons, this density accumulates, strengthening trunks and branches without increasing size dramatically. As structure becomes more stable, resource use shifts. Fewer materials are directed toward outward expansion. More are used to maintain existing tissue and protect vulnerable surfaces. Chemical compounds within bark and outer wood discourage insects and fungi, reducing the need for repair later. These compounds are produced steadily, supported by energy captured during favorable periods. Branch systems adjust in the same gradual way. Branches that receive consistent light continue to thicken and remain active. Those that remain shaded for long periods slowly receive less energy. Their transport pathways narrow, and eventually activity declines. This redistribution does not involve sudden loss. It unfolds as resources are directed toward areas that continue contributing. Even when internal sections of wood no longer transport water, they remain part of the structure. New transport tissue forms closer to the surface, allowing circulation to continue around inactive regions. This outward renewal keeps essential systems functioning while preserving the strength of older layers. Through these adjustments, trees maintain function without replacing their core. Growth becomes a matter of refinement rather than expansion, allowing persistence through changing conditions while keeping internal systems aligned. Trees that endure for long spans often show this pattern clearly. Their form reflects restraint rather than reach. Height increases slow early. Width increases continue at a measured pace. The balance between transport, support, and protection remains steady, allowing activity to continue even as visible change becomes minimal. In such trees, survival depends on continuity of structure rather than constant renewal. Living tissue remains active where it is most effective, while older material provides stability. This arrangement allows the tree to remain present and functional under conditions that would overwhelm faster-growing plants. Over many growth cycles, this approach produces forms that appear unchanged from year to year, even though internal circulation and maintenance continue without pause. Trees that remain standing for very long periods often occupy environments where change is limited but persistent. High elevations, dry slopes, and nutrient-poor soils restrict rapid growth while reducing pressure from competing plants. In these settings, trees invest less in height and more in durability. Wood formed under these conditions is compact and slow to decay, allowing trunks to remain intact even when large sections no longer conduct water. In some cases, only a narrow band of living tissue continues to function. This thin outer layer transports water and nutrients, while inner wood remains inactive but structurally sound. As long as this outer band stays connected from roots to leaves, the tree remains alive. Damage that would be fatal to faster-growing species can be tolerated because essential pathways occupy only a small portion of the total structure. Certain species extend survival through repeated replacement rather than continuous growth. In clonal systems, new stems emerge from long-established root networks. Individual trunks may live for a few centuries, but the underlying structure persists far longer. Each new stem draws on resources accumulated in the same root system, maintaining continuity without relying on a single trunk. These forms of persistence depend on limiting exposure rather than overcoming it. Growth remains measured. Repair occurs at the margins. Structure accumulates faster than it degrades. Through this balance, trees remain present across intervals that reshape surrounding landscapes, maintaining activity even as conditions around them shift. Ancient trees therefore represent not exceptional growth, but sustained restraint. Their continued presence reflects careful use of resources and gradual adjustment rather than expansion. Where trees persist for very long spans, their surroundings begin to reflect that persistence. Soil beneath them carries a record of repeated inputs from leaves, fine roots, and wood fragments. Organic material accumulates slowly, mixing with mineral particles and forming stable layers that resist erosion. This layered ground holds moisture longer after rainfall and releases it gradually, supporting root activity even when surface conditions dry. Roots adjust to these conditions by maintaining depth rather than spreading rapidly. In poor or shallow soils, growth follows cracks and fractures in rock, occupying spaces where water collects briefly and then drains. Over time, these paths widen slightly as roots expand and contract with moisture changes. This process alters the physical structure of the substrate, improving access without displacing it. Above ground, trunks and branches weather in place. Outer bark thickens and sheds in sections, removing surface damage while exposing newly formed protective layers beneath. This slow renewal limits the spread of decay. Instead of sealing wounds completely, trees grow around them, isolating damaged tissue and maintaining function elsewhere. Leaves produced under these conditions tend to be smaller and tougher. Reduced surface area limits water loss, while thicker tissue resists damage from wind and temperature variation. Photosynthesis proceeds at a modest rate, sufficient to support maintenance and gradual reinforcement rather than rapid expansion. Animals interacting with these trees, encounter stable structure. Cavities persist for many seasons. Branches remain in place long enough for repeated use. This reliability shapes local activity patterns, concentrating movement and nutrient inputs around the same locations year after year. Through steady interaction between structure and environment, long-lived trees anchor their surroundings. Their presence moderates conditions, supports continued biological activity, and maintains continuity without requiring constant change. Growth continues, but it does so by strengthening what already exists, rather than extending into new space. Trees remain closely connected to human activity because their physical properties make them useful without requiring complex processing. Wood forms as a strong, lightweight material that resists compression while remaining workable. These qualities emerge naturally from the way cells are arranged and reinforced. Long fibers align along the length of trunks and branches, giving wood strength where it is most needed. The same structure allows it to be cut, shaped, and joined using simple tools. As trees grow, they store energy in the form of carbohydrates locked into wood. When wood is used, that stored energy becomes available again, either as heat or as part of a longer-lasting structure. This exchange links biological growth to human use without altering the underlying system that produced it. Trees continue growing even as parts of earlier growth are removed, provided essential tissues remain intact. Human interaction with trees also alters growth patterns. Pruning redirects energy toward remaining branches, increasing their thickness and stability. Removal of competing vegetation changes light availability, allowing trees to adjust leaf production and canopy spread. These responses follow the same internal rules that govern natural growth, differing only in the external conditions that trigger them. Over extended periods, managed and unmanaged trees influence landscapes in similar ways. Root systems stabilize soil. Canopies slow rainfall. Organic matter accumulates. Even when individual trees are removed, these effects persist for some time, supporting continued biological activity. Cultural associations arise from this consistency. Trees remain present across generations, providing familiar reference points. Their form changes slowly enough to be recognized year after year. This stability encourages repeated use of the same spaces, reinforcing patterns of movement and settlement. In built environments, trees moderate conditions, much as they do in forests. Shade reduces surface temperatures. Evaporation from leaves cools surrounding air. Roots alter water infiltration beneath paved and unpaved surfaces alike. These effects reduce extremes rather than eliminating them, contributing to comfort through moderation. As trees continue growing alongside human structures, they adjust to constrained spaces by altering root depth and branch orientation. Growth becomes more compact, but remains functional. Transport systems adapt to shorter pathways and reduced canopy size without losing efficiency. Through continued interaction, trees become part of everyday environments without losing their biological character. Their growth remains governed by internal processes shaped by water movement, energy capture, and structural reinforcement. Human presence changes conditions, but trees respond using the same mechanisms that operate in less altered settings. Toward the later stages of their lives, trees shift further toward maintenance and renewal. Growth continues at the margins. Older tissues remain in place, supporting structure while new tissue forms closer to the surface. This outward renewal preserves function even as internal regions become inactive. Eventually, decline occurs not through sudden failure, but through gradual loss of active tissue. Transport pathways narrow, leaf production decreases, energy capture slows. These changes unfold over many cycles, allowing surrounding organisms to adjust as conditions shift. As activity diminishes, stored material remains. Wood contributes to soil formation as it breaks down. Nutrients re-enter circulation. Spaces once occupied by trunks and roots become sites for new growth. The physical presence of the tree continues influencing conditions even after active growth has ceased. Through this sequence, trees participate in continuity beyond their own lifespan. Growth supports structure. Structure supports interaction. Interaction reshapes environment. Each stage follows from physical processes rather than intent, linking living activity to lasting change without interruption. Trees remain part of everyday surroundings because their presence does not demand attention. They continue functioning whether noticed or not, adjusting quietly to the conditions around them. In places where people pass daily, roots extend beneath paths and open ground, following moisture and space rather than surface patterns. Branches grow around obstacles, altering direction without interruption to internal flow. In these settings, trees influence routine conditions. Shade shifts across the ground as the sun moves. Air near leaves remains slightly cooler during warm periods. Moisture released from foliage softens dryness in the immediate area. These effects are subtle, but they persist, shaping comfort through moderation rather than change. Care and interaction also follow gradual rhythms. When branches are removed, transport adjusts to remaining pathways. When soil is compacted, roots redirect growth to less resistant zones. These responses do not alter the nature of the system. They apply the same physical and biological processes already in place, maintaining function under modified conditions. As trees continue growing in shared spaces, their form reflects constraint as well as opportunity. Canopies remain compact where space is limited. Roots favor depth over spread when surfaces are sealed. Despite these adjustments, internal circulation remains continuous. Water still rises through narrow vessels. Sugars still redistribute through living tissue. Growth remains steady, though shaped by surroundings. Over long periods, this persistence creates familiarity. Trees become fixed points in changing environments. Their form changes slowly enough to remain recognizable while still responding to local conditions. This balance allows them to remain present without dominating space. Eventually, visible growth slows further. Leaf production becomes modest. Branch extension shortens. The structure that has formed carries most of the load, while active tissue focuses on maintenance and limited renewal. Even then, circulation continues. Water moves. Energy redistributes. Living cells remain active where they are most effective. As activity declines, material remains. Wood contributes to soil as it breaks down. Nutrients return to circulation. Spaces once occupied become part of the surrounding system. The influence of the tree extends beyond active growth, continuing through the physical changes it leaves behind. In this way, trees remain connected to their surroundings from establishment through maturity and beyond. Growth, adjustment, and decline follow the same underlying processes, unfolding steadily without abrupt transitions. The system remains continuous, shaped by movement of water, energy, and material rather than by visible change. As growth slows further, the remaining activity becomes focused and efficient. Water continues to move upward through established pathways, supplying leaves that remain active where light is available. Sugars produced there are directed toward maintaining living tissue rather than building new structure. This redistribution keeps essential systems operating without increasing demand. Transport pathways narrow gradually as fewer tissues require supply. Older vessels remain in place, providing support, while newer tissue closer to the surface carries what movement is still needed. This arrangement reduces internal strain and limits exposure to damage. The tree maintains function by simplifying rather than expanding. Material that is no longer needed within the structure begins to re-enter surrounding systems. Small amounts of wood break down at the surface. Roots that are no longer active decompose slowly in the soil. Nutrients released during this process dissolve into soil water and move short distances, supporting other plants nearby. These transfers occur steadily, without sudden loss. Space once occupied by dense canopy opens gradually. Light reaches lower levels more often. Air movement increases slightly. These changes allow other plants to establish and adjust. The influence of the tree remains present, guiding conditions even as its own activity diminishes. What persists longest is structure. Trunks and large roots remain in place, shaping water movement and soil stability. Their presence continues to slow runoff, retain moisture, and support biological activity. Even without active growth, these physical effects remain measurable. Through these stages, continuity is preserved. Processes that supported growth now support transition. Material remains within the same cycles of movement and exchange. Nothing is removed abruptly. Change occurs through redistribution rather than interruption. Even as visible activity becomes minimal, internal coordination continues. Water still rises through remaining pathways when conditions allow, supplying leaves that persist in favorable positions. Sugars produced there move slowly through living tissue, supporting maintenance rather than expansion. This circulation does not require speed. It relies on continuity and balance, keeping cells functional where they remain active. Roots that continue absorbing water and minerals operate at reduced scale, focusing on stable zones rather than broad exploration. Fine roots persist where moisture remains reliable, while others gradually lose activity and return their material to the soil. This shift reduces demand while preserving access, aligning uptake with remaining need. Surface conditions around the tree adjust as structure remains in place. Shade patterns soften. Soil retains moisture longer beneath residual canopy and accumulated organic matter. Air movement remains moderated by trunks and branches, reducing extremes even as foliage thins. These effects continue shaping the immediate environment without depending on ongoing growth. Within the wood itself, inactive regions remain structurally important. Older tissue continues bearing weight and resisting movement. Living tissue closer to the surface maintains transport and repair, reinforcing areas that remain functional. This separation of roles allows persistence without internal replacement. As materials slowly transition back into surrounding systems, they do so locally. Nutrients released from decomposing roots and wood enter nearby soil. Water carries them short distances, supporting other plants without abrupt redistribution. The influence of the tree remains concentrated where it stood, guiding conditions rather than dispersing them. Through these gradual adjustments, activity becomes quieter, but not absent. Movement continues at reduced scale. Exchange persists without expansion. The structure that formed over many growth cycles continues shaping water, air, and soil, maintaining continuity through presence rather than production. Thank you for listening to the Sleepy Mind channel. I hope you have enjoyed spending time moving through the world of trees and how they grow.